Thank you. It's very, very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, congratulations on Lover Beloved. I think it's a wonderful album.
Thank you so
I
much.
love the jazzy, warm sound. It conjures up the vibrant world in which Carson McCullers lived and worked.
Thank you.
New York in the 1940s, the
Yeah.
Yaddo residency, but also Georgia, the South, where she was raised. I also love the way in which you sketch the complexity of Carson McCullers as a human being in lyrics that are about her life and her work. Could you tell us something about your interest in Carson McCullers and about the process of making her into a character, since the album has developed out of a play in which you play Carson McCullers?
Yes. Sure, I can do that. I first read Carson McCullers when I was about 15 years old. I found a short story in a collection of short stories. And the only story I remember from that collection was her story. It was a story called Sucker. And I thought, that I really like this story. Whoever wrote this really understands children. It was written from a point of view of a boy, an adolescent boy, who has a relationship with his cousin. And over the course of the story, the power changes between the one boy and the other boy. And I remember thinking, yeah, whoever wrote this really understands children and understands the need to be loved. And I thought it was a man who wrote it because the name said Carson McCullers, there was no photograph. And so I sort of put it on the back burner for many years. Several years later, I saw the biography of Carson McCullers. It had just come out. It was on the shelf of the library. And I saw the name, and I saw a woman, and I saw her face, and I thought, oh, I remember that story called Sucker, and this is the woman who wrote that book, that story. And again, I didn't read the book, I just left it there. So then I went to college, and I was taking a theater class, and my theater teacher said, come in dressed as someone in the arts who's no longer living, and be prepared to answer questions as though you're giving an interview on television. And I remembered the photograph, and I remembered the story, and I said I could play that woman. I hadn't read the biography, and I hadn't read anything else, but I just had a feeling, and I bought the biography, the one you're reading now, which is that fat, 600 pages, and found a jacket and found some cigarettes and came in the next day, and I've been going ever since. So that was when I was in college. So it's been a very long journey to this moment in time.
You mentioned that when you read Sucker, that you thought, oh, this person really understands children. Carson McCullers often writes about children or 12-year-old girls. There's Mick Kelly in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, an adolescent girl who dresses like a boy, and then there's Frankie Adams in The Member of the Wedding. And when I was reading your The Passionate Eye, I noticed your book, your collection of lyrics and writings, essays, diary fragments. I noticed that you incorporate poems that you wrote when you were very young. There's one poem that you wrote when you were 9, and then you compare it to Solitude Standing, which you wrote when you were 27. Why did you want to share your 9-year-old self with your readers?
Audience? Because, yeah, I mean, it's not as though I think that the poems are so great that they need to, come out into the world. It was more that there's the germ of an idea. So there's a similar theme. The poem I wrote when I was 9 years old is called By Myself, and there's a little, 3 verses. They rhyme. The meter is correct. So there's a kind of a thought that 20 years later becomes Solitude Standing. And so it was really more I wanted to show the audience that that a life is not always a straight line, that it kind of goes around, that there are certain themes that keep coming back. So this was my intention, was to say, here's this little piece, and then here's the more fully developed one.
There was also, when Carson McCullers became famous, she was really marketed as a very young author. There's this one picture that's also in that biography that the publisher used, and she looks 16 or maybe
Yes.
even younger.
I know the one you mean, yeah.
And this persona of the girl author, it stuck in a sense.
Yeah.
How do you... Because when I'm reading that biography, I sometimes feel I can't breathe because of the very close relationship she had with her mother. She also thought of herself as a daughter, as a child until well into her 20s, 30s. Of course, we all think of ourselves as children to our parents, but there was something really special about the way in which she related to her mother and vice versa. Was that part of your interest in the persona of McCullers, or how do you feel about that girl aspect that is so prominent?
I liked her for her girlish aspects, because even though she's a girl, you can see it even in that photograph that you're talking about. She has a cigarette, and she's there's something kind of tough about her. It's not just that she's a girl, she's a certain kind of girl. She's sophisticated, she's intelligent, she's writing about politics in some ways, about a social world. She has ideas about social justice, which she's putting into this novel. She's really way beyond her years. And so that was fascinating to me. The reason she had this close relationship with her mother is because she was very needy. She had many things wrong with her physically. She had rheumatic fever as a teenager, which was never diagnosed. So it led to heart problems, it led to strokes, it led to all kinds of other problems. And then on top of that, she drank constantly, and she smoked every day, all day. So by the time she was 50, she really had a lot of issues and problems. And her mother doted on her, but even if her mother wasn't around, she had this kind of neediness, a kind of voracious hunger for affection and love and attention from people. And this, to me, was very much fun to play.
Yeah.
to drink and smoke and be needy and be, absolutely shameless in what she would do to get attention and to get affection. And she could be very cruel, in spite of the fact that she could also be very compassionate. I mean, her work is beautifully compassionate. She feels for all kinds of people. And yet she's so rude and so mean to her husband.
Yeah, the record, you get a sense of the joy when you sing New York's my destination, and I want to be a star.
Yeah.
It must be fun to play such.
Yes, you can feel the hunger and the desire to really to show everyone what you're capable of. But there was also, of course, in a child like that, there's a deep insecurity. You get the feeling that she wants to please her mother. Her mother knew before she was born that she was a genius. So imagine having that kind of pressure. You think, oh, if I'm not a genius, maybe my mother will not love me. So if you need all this care and you need all this attention, the way she got it was to keep having to perform in her writing. And so she did, right up to the end of her life. She wrote and she wrote and she wrote.
In a very disciplined way, because that also struck me. There was all the booze and the wild parties, but she also got up really early and played the piano for 3 hours and then worked on her writing until...
She worked on her writing, yeah. Which was the difference between her and her husband. Her husband had aspirations of being a writer, but never could actually sit down and put the pen to the paper. And that was a big difference between them.
Also, already present in Sucker, that early story of Carson McCullers that you read, is this triangular relationship.
Yeah.
And that returns in many of her stories. And on your album, there's the We of Me song that is an adaptation of a member of the wedding, the story about Frankie Adams, a young girl who wants to be in on her brother's marriage.
Wedding, yes, wedding and marriage. Yeah.
And it was played on the Flemish radio quite a lot a couple of weeks ago, and I remember hearing it when I was driving in my car, taking my kids to someplace. And I was smiling because finally someone turns, or it's not this cliched version of love that we get in the song "The We of Me." It's most pop songs. In most pop songs, love is almost this vanilla thing, and that's not at all what happens in "The We of Me." It's
right.
This complex triangular relationship. So, is it also a comment on the way in which popular songs rehearse the same old cliches?
I didn't intend for it to be, but it sort of turned into that. I wrote the song because we needed a song at that moment in the play. And I wrote it like overnight, and we put it in. And to my surprise, the audience always gave it a big clap, clapped at the end of it. And then so it became the single off the album. But yeah, it's complicated, and people like the song, and then they start to think about it, and then they come to me going, "What's this about?" 3 people living together? That's kind of weird. And some people love it, and some people think it's it's weird. But it works, and it works in the song, and it works in the play, because it's about Frankie, who's innocent. She's a 12-year-old girl. She wants to be with her brother and her brother's bride. And she wants to live with the 2 of them and travel with them forever. And there's something very innocent and charming about this. But it also happens that in her life, she did emotionally attach herself to all kinds of people and try and bring them into her family. And Reeves, her husband, also did the same. So that it's a little less innocent, it's a little more complicated. But they were very free in their lives and very open about their complications and their needs and their desires, and it was a really big mess, the way the way they lived was, in some ways very destructive, but again, a lot of fun to play.
Yeah. Because they married and then remarried.
They married, they divorced, they remarried, they had affairs, they had affairs that were probably platonic, I think on her part. They probably did not always lead to sex. With him, they often did. So it was, it's a very complicated, very rich life we're looking at.
Another one of the songs on the album, Anne-Marie, deals with maybe the love of Carson McCullers' life, Anne-Marie Schwarzenbach. Did you do extra research on Schwarzenbach as a
I
writer,
did research on everything I could find just because I wanted to create the world on stage. And actually she is a fascinating woman. If you go onto Google and Google her, there's still photographs of her. She is so beautiful and so striking. Very androgynous, very blonde, very kind of severe. There's a sort of character that really comes through her face. Very attractive. And she did not hold Carson McCullers in the same stature that, she was sort of this golden girl. So she did not return Carson McCullers' feelings. But she had a kind of tragic life as well.
She was entangled with the Manns, Erika Mann, Klaus Mann.
Yeah, Erika Mann, Thomas Mann, yeah.
But then at the end, I think, at the end of Anne-Marie Schwarzenbach's life, they did correspond.
Oh yeah, they were close. They were friends. She dedicated one of her books to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie also, I think, suffered from mental illness, which was part of her life thread. Maybe we could, or
Another song that I wanted to ask you about
Okay.
is the song 12 Mortal Men, which is an adaptation of the short coda text added to the famous story, The Ballad of the Sad Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
And in the song you also refer to the vision of the Civil Rights March
Mm-hmm.
that occurs not in The Ballad of the Sad Cafe, but in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And that book was published in 1940, but the actual Civil March as a historical event only took place in 1963.
Yeah.
So I mean that's striking that it's there in that 1940s book.
Yes.
Is that something you look for in literature, in art, this almost visionary aspect, or?
It wasn't something I was looking for, but something I really noticed. I mean, at first I thought she must have had a dream or a vision, and as I did more reading, I realized that the idea had been around a long time. I think the idea of a march on Washington had been around since the 1930s. In fact, I think they had tried to organize it once or twice, and it always fell apart, and it wasn't until 1963 that they were actually able to have the march. So some of it is that Carson McCullers really is a visionary, and she did have a dream, but it's also part of the ideas of the day in 1930, in 1940, and in the 50s. So it kept kind of pushing forward, and finally in the 60s we actually get the actual thing. But it was so prescient of her to have it in the novel, especially as a young woman, to just put it there. I mean, she was way ahead of her time in recognizing it as an idea to put into a piece of work.
Mm. And she was really, I mean, she addressed racism as a very young author, and she got threatened by the Klan, by the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
And her father sat out on the porch
With a shotgun,
waiting
yes.
for them to come.
And they did come, yeah.
So that's also a very important part of Carson McCullers' project as a writer, addressing those problems of the South.
Yes, and very directly. She embodies her characters. I mean, I think there's a difference between herself and between Harper Lee. Harper Lee tells the story. Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, which is the classic civil rights novel. Carson McCullers not only told the story, but in a sense embodied everything that she writes about. She doesn't just write about sexuality, she embodies a bisexual body. And when she writes about racism, you really believe her character. There's a character of an older black doctor. He's a middle-class doctor. His passion is to educate his people, his children and his neighbors. And this is a very clearly drawn character. He's very angry also. Yeah. He's unsparing in his anger, and he's very idiosyncratic. He's not any kind of stereotype. So I think that was her great gift, was to really see someone and feel them and be able to write their point of view from their own self. You know, she had that kind of empathy. It wasn't just a narrative saying this person did this and that. She actually really kind of felt it, took it inside of herself and put it onto the page. And some of this was because of the ideas that she discussed with her husband. Reeves McCullers was very knowledgeable about social issues, and they had a lot of discussions. So all the things he was not able to put on the page, she did. And that was also one of her gifts. Just it moved her. She had a great passion for it, and she was able to put it down in all of its weirdnesses there for us to see now. So if Harper Lee is the classic, Carson McCullers is the alternative, you know, and in all the meanings of that word. She was the alternative then. She would be now if she were alive. I think she would be more understood in this day and age than she was in the 1940s.
Understanding and the need to be understood is also a thread, a theme in her books. Mm-hmm. And that was what struck me when I was rereading The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, is that there's this emphasis on intuition, on not thinking things through necessarily, but knowing them because it's in the air or because you're part of a certain community.
Yeah, I think a lot of her writing was very intuitive. She was intelligent, but I wouldn't say she was any sort of academic or... she was very quirky and just seemed to know things and could be very irrational, you know, so it wasn't that she felt things and she figured out how to put them down. I must say, not always successfully. You know, there's some of her works are so strange that even I, who I'm a big fan, I look at them sometimes and say, well, this is very uneven. Reflections in a Golden Eye is probably one of the weirdest books you'll ever read. And even details here and there kind of come up and you say, why would you put that in this book? But on the other hand, she's a young girl, she's a young woman, why shouldn't she put down things that are violent or weird? You know, men have been doing it for years and we don't seem to think it's that weird. You know, Hubert Selby writes Last Exit to Brooklyn and that's fine, you know, but if Carson McCullers writes about self-mutilation or certain kinds of violent acts, everyone's just like, oh, that's disgusting. So I admire her for her freedom.
She's not an academic, sort of, or she didn't write like an academic, but yet she has these theories. She has grand theories.
Oh yeah, she has grand theories, yes. It's true. She has theories, but at the same time, if you look at the theories, I sometimes think she just liked language, and she would use certain language to kind of to put herself on the pedestal, on the podium, so that she could abstract things. When she talks about the theory of love, she was 24 years old when she wrote her theory of love. Her theory of love is basically that no one really loves anyone else. The lover is from one country, the beloved is from another country. They're never going to get together. They're never really going to be united. She was having a really hard time with Reeves at this moment in time. So she's 24 years old. She writes down what's happening in her own life, but she does it as a kind of theory, as though she's a scientist. And people really have loved those paragraphs. They are very beautiful and very telling. So she's trying to abstract. She's trying to make a statement about humanity in general. Maybe if she had tried it at a different point in her life, maybe it would be a different theory. So.
Yeah, but that's also something that's so typical for McCullers, making these grand statements, wanting to do too much, maybe sometimes, because there's this, let me just check.
Well, she had tremendous ambition, which I admire her for that, you know, yeah.
But there's this interview on YouTube, an interview from the 1950s, and she's on a boat with a reporter, and it's only 5 minutes.
Yes.
What you get to see on YouTube is.
Yes.
And he asks her about a member of the wedding, I think, and about the social issues involved. And then she responds, I wasn't thinking about the social issues, I was thinking about humanity, human beings, and the way in which we're all lonely. And then the reporter doesn't know how to respond, and he says, so, Ms. McCullers, and what about your present plans? And that makes her so lonely. She's there wanting to talk about humanity.
She also kind of nestles into him. He has his arm around her, and she kind of, does this sort of thing against him, and he's...
It's a bizarre physical vibe.
She's very slow, and she has the cigarette holder. Yeah, so she's always thinking of the big picture in a way and wanting to join the bigger picture. But at the same time, her characters live these small lives. But she gets the whole spectrum in there.
Yeah, and the characters always want to belong, need to belong, complain that they're not part of a club. But that's also, of course, where they get their strength from. They're outsiders.
Yes.
And she wanted to get outsiders into literature. In all of her books, the word freak
Yeah, all the time.
appears.
Yeah.
And she also thought of herself as a freak. She
Very
thought
much,
she was
very much. Yeah.
too tall and
Too tall and with so many things wrong and awkward and with strange visions and needs. And yet at the same time you have her constantly going to some parties or going to dinners or going to communal places where she can be with other people. And in her lifetime she was so loved. When she died, her funeral was packed with people. All of them knew her, all of them loved her. She gave speeches on a stage and people would come, and you can feel the affection for her if you ever listen to the there's a tape of her speaking at the 92nd Street Y. So she was well known in her lifetime. She was not shunned by the public. She was embraced, and she loved that.
yeah, she also took her fan mail very seriously.
Yeah.
And read everything and was appalled when someone accused her of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And wanted to publicly respond, but then was called back by, I think, Harper's Bazaar or the magazine in which the story had appeared. But yeah, she was in contact with her audience.
Yeah.
Is that something that you feel you're able to do, or
In my own life.
as an artist?
Well, I go on Facebook. I'm not sure that's what you mean, but in a way, it is what I mean, because I do read everything. I maintain my own pages. I do my own Twitter accounts, and I lately sometimes need a little break because the atmosphere has become so political, especially in the United States. It's just unbearable. There is no relief. So instead of going on there 2 times a day, maybe I go on there 3 times a week. But yeah, I care about my audience. I want to know who they are. I maintain my contact with them.
And is this a political project for you?
It is kind of an outlet for my political feelings and my feelings about social justice. And I've been working on it for so long that I was amazed, actually, at recent events, because I sort of thought, I did a version of this play back in 2011, and then I felt we were on a really terrific path, and I thought, oh, Carson McCullers would be so happy to know all the ways in which we've progressed, that bisexual people don't have to hide, that gay people can marry one another, that the people who have disabilities have more rights, they can be more public, and I thought this is great. This is a good time for this play. And then everything changed last fall, and suddenly everything that Carson McCullers represented is now under fire. So it's in a weird way, it's become an even better time for the play because it shows the timelessness of her work, and it shows, well, the timelessness and the power that was there in her work then and is still there now. So it has sharpened my feelings of it's an outlet for what I also feel I represent and what I want to say. And a lot of times, I must say, I find political art to be sort of tiresome. I mean, unless you're Bob Dylan and you've written Masters of War, which doesn't talk about which war or any particular leader. It's just a great, powerful, personal statement. I find a lot of political art to be kind of, it fulfills a moment in time and then you can leave it behind. But in this case, I feel a sense of relief in having this play, which is going to open next year in February, Valentine's Day, in Houston, Texas, at a theater called the Alley Theater.
That's perfect. February is the month of her birthday. And
Yes,
Texas is close to where relatively close to where she
was born.
Texans.
Yeah. And then I hope after that I can travel. This is going to be a world premiere, so it's a brand new version of the play that I've done twice already in different forms. So.
Since we've been talking about the politics now, maybe this is a good time to read the coda section to the Ballad of the Sad Cafe.
I'd love that. The Forks Falls Highway is 3 miles from the town, and it is here the chain gang has been working. The road is of macadam, and the county decided to patch up the rough places and widen it at a certain dangerous place. The gang is made up of 12 men, all wearing black and white striped prison suits and chained at the ankles. There's a guard with a gun, his eyes drawn to red slits by the glare. The gang works all the day long, arriving huddled in the prison cart soon after daybreak and being driven off again in the gray August twilight. All day there is the sound of picks striking into the clay earth, hard sunlight, the smell of sweat. And every day there's music. One dark voice will start a phrase, half sung and like a question. And after a moment, another voice will join in. Soon the whole gang will be singing. The voices are dark in the golden glare, the music intricately blended, both somber and joyful. The music will swell until at last it seems the sound does not come from the 12 men on the gang, but from the earth itself or the wide sky. It is music that causes the heart to broaden and the listener to grow cold with ecstasy and fright. Then slowly the music will sink down until at last there remains one lonely voice. Then a great hoarse breath, the sun, the sound of picks in the silence. And what kind of gang is this that can make such music? Just 12 mortal men, 7 of them black and 5 of them white boys from this county. Just 12 mortal men who are together.
Thank you. I feel like applauding. Maybe my final question before we do the Q&A. There's music in this section that you just read. Like there's music in almost all of Carson McCullers' stories.
Yeah.
She was a pianist. Is that also something that you can relate to as a musician, as a singer-songwriter, as a singer? The fact that all of her stories, there's this undercurrent of music there. Did that make it easier for you to set her work to music or make adaptations?
Yeah, I feel there is a kind of singing on the page that happens when I read her works. A kind of cadences and rhythms. And so when I was working with Duncan Sheik, who did the music, it was easy to find certain ideas and to kind of sing them out to him and say, I want a song called, New York is my destination, and so that's a waltz, New York is my destination. So it's easy to pick those moments out. So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Okay, shall we turn to the audience now
Sure.
for questions? Does anyone have a question? There's one next.
I think probably my favourite character of Carson McCullers is Mick Kelly in The Heart's the Lonely Hunter. I found myself wondering for a long time afterwards what would become of Mick, whether she'd realised her dreams, because she has this innate talent for music which she can't really explore because she's growing up in such an impoverished environment, and she never really confides in people how she feels about it, so there's all this talent that's somehow kind of trapped within her. So in my imagination I often thought, what happens to Mick after the story? What happens to her if things work out differently? And I wondered what would you like to happen to Mick?
What would I like to happen to Mick? I would like her to achieve her dreams, to get out of the poverty that she lived in. You can feel the drive that she has. I have to say, I myself grew up under the poverty line in New York City. I stayed that way until I graduated college. I put myself through school. So every program, those programs that are described in her book for like groups of impoverished children, I was part of those groups as well. And Carson McCullers draws that world really beautifully. So there is a way out. Whether or not Mick Kelly would not be ground down by her poverty, that's the struggle there. You don't want her to get married too soon and with 5 children and have to make her living. You know, you want her to really find her way. And it's possible, but you need a lot of support. You need someone who can help you in life, and that's what Mick Kelly would need. Someone to recognize the gift that she has and help her along with it. Thanks.
Yes, hi. Well, to be honest, I don't know the author, so I was wondering which kind of book you would advise to start with.
I would advise you to start with The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Her first novel, to me, is the most complete, the least idiosyncratic, although it's still quite idiosyncratic, but it's really, I think, a masterpiece, and one that I think most people can really relate to.
Okay, thanks. Then a very short one. I've been asking myself since the 80s is it Suzanne Vega or Suzanne Vega?
It's Suzanne Vega.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, no.
Just a question not on literature, but I can imagine that if you go into your record company's office and you say, hey, I've got this great idea, I'm going to do an album on an author, Carson McCullers, shall we do this?
Yeah.
I can imagine that the record company would say, well, excuse me? So how did that go?
It went fine because I am my own record company. And so even though it means I have a very small budget, but it means that the record company was wildly enthusiastic. But it's been kind of great, actually, because we were very smart about how we did it. My manager is sitting right here. He's the one who helps me to administer all of this. So we have to be more intelligent than we used to when we had huge budgets and lots of committee people to talk, to persuade. Yeah, I was very happy with how it came out. I understand that some of the fans are a little surprised, but it's not that difficult to understand the concept. But I agree with your perspective. Normally, yes, it would be a nightmare.
You told us you read a story, the first story, when you were 15.
Yeah.
Well, I read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter when I was 17 because of a school teacher, but
Of course.
I became a fan. I haven't read anything of Carson McCullers since that time, and the book was given to me in a new Dutch translation just recently, so I will read it again over the summertime. But I'm wondering, you read it, the short story, many years after again. Did you read the same story? What should I expect? Should I expect to read the same things when I was 17? Or will I read completely different things in that book? In The Heart is a Lonely
It will
Hunter?
strike you differently, I'm sure, because the novel has so much range in it. She writes beautifully from the view of a young girl, and people think of her in a kind of sentimental way sometimes. Oh, the 12-year-old girls and youth, and but you'll be stricken by. I'm not sure it will strike you. The depth of the other characters also. The older black man who's so articulate and so angry, and then there's there's the socialist. There's a socialist character who's very angry, very articulate also in a very different way. He's a sort of lower class white man. So all of these characters will strike you differently because you have more experience now, and you've known more kinds of people, and you've been out in the world. You have your own developed political ideas, viewpoints, and experiences behind you. So I think you'll feel it quite differently. Yeah.
Just kind of following up what the gentleman said over there, would you say that your relationship to Carson McCullers has changed over time?
Yeah. I first played the part when I was 21. And this was years before I had a record deal, years before I had majored in theater, I had majored in English literature and minored in theater in college. So the first time, it was the kind of thrill to play this sophisticated woman who was drinking and smoking. And now that I'm playing her again, and I'm playing her both as a young woman and in the months right before her death. So at first I thought of her truly as a freak, as a kind of freaky person. She was so weird when I was 21, and I thought, this is really fun to play this freak. And now that I'm older, I realize that she's not a freak. She's very human, and most lives are really messy. We don't always show what the mess, but most lives have some kind of overflow or some situations where things are more fluid than they might otherwise be, if you really dig. So I realize now I feel that she's really, really quite human and not so freaky. So I feel like my sort of relationship with her has deepened over the years, and I continue to feel that what she had to say is something still so relevant, and I really look forward to not just doing the part myself, but seeing other people do it, because I feel that her spirit needs to be brought back to life for this day and age. I feel that there might be a kind of recognition of who she was on the stage, and I'm looking forward to seeing other people do it. My dream is that a transgender actor or actress will do the role at some time, I don't know, next 10 years or something like that. I think that would be really a good thing.
Do you think you'll ever be done with Carson McCullers?
I hope so. I feel sometimes that I am in a kind of dialogue with her, and I get really tired. She's a very needy person, even after death. I feel myself she's really hungering, and I'm looking forward to the time when I can pass it on to other people and just watch it and say, okay, I've done my job, and now I'm going to do other things, other plays, other kinds of things. I'd love to write another play or with some other people. That would be fun.
Looking forward to that. Is
Yeah.
there one final question, maybe?
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, you have an interest in Buddhism. I was wondering whether that has a link with Carson McCullers, or is that a completely different department of your life?
They're connected a little bit. I've studied and practiced, not just studied, but practiced Buddhism since I was 16 years old. And one of the things we've learned in Buddhism is there's the idea of the 10 worlds that range from hell all the way up to enlightenment. And the world before enlightenment is the world of the bodhisattva, the world of someone who helps others. And in my way of thinking, that was Carson McCullers, was a bodhisattva, a kind of bodhisattva. Her intention was to help. She felt a lot of empathy. She felt people's pain. She was able to put it in words. She also inflicted a fair amount of pain, but I think it was a kind of innocent, confused sort of human inflicting. So that's what I think of, that's the connection there. I mean, I don't think she herself tried to be a good Catholic, a good Christian, not Catholic, Christian. She didn't believe in a soul. She believed that when you died, that was it. I don't agree. I think there's a part of life that's eternal. I wonder, in fact, I feel that I'm sort of trying to help her have an eternal life, you know, by revisiting her as she was and bringing her to life again. So there's a kind of loose connection between the world of Buddhism and this ongoing preoccupation with Carson McCullers.
Thank you ever so much, Sarah
Thank
and
you.
Suzanne Vega. It really wants us to go and read the books and listen to your music, of course. So good luck
Yeah.
with the concert tonight, and thank you so much for being here and talking to us about this incredible writer. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.